From Sex, Drugs, and Violence, Incomplete Stories for the Incomplete Human by Jeremy Void. The Jeep rumbled as Jeffrey steered it through the desert, craning his neck at the sight of all the dead bodies. They were everywhere, beaten, bloody, decapitated, and rotting. Dark red rivers were streaming out from beneath some of the bodies and pooling in boot prints pressed in the sand. It was awful, and the putrid stench crept into his nostrils, making him want to gag. He entered a thick mist and his vision was distorted. He pulled the Jeep to a stop, and it rumbled idly as he stepped out and grabbed his rifle from the back and slung the strap over his shoulder. He could only see a couple feet in front of him. His hands shook slightly as he fought with his nerves. His head rotated atop his neck, intently checking out his surroundings. The stench of rotting flesh grew, and he gagged, moved on, gagged again. Then up came his lunch, splattering at his feet, bits and chunks of chewed beans sticking to his boots. He moved on, trying to ignore the smell, What do we have here, he thought. A man, severed at the waist, was crawling toward Jeffrey, his intestines leaving behind a bloody trail. Jeffrey went over to the man and kneeled down by his head. The man stopped crawling and peered up at Jeffrey through a single eye and a bullet hole where his other eye had been. "What happened here?" Jeffrey said. The man tried to speak, but his tongue had been severed and instead he moaned ghoulishly. Jeffrey removed his sidearm and pressed it to the top of the man's head, squinted and grimaced when blood sprayed and splattered his face and the man's head cascaded to the sand. Jeffrey rose and then proceeded. He heard a roar. He turned, saw a black Jeep emerge out of the mist. Fired, missed, fired again, and the driver's head erupted in an explosion of blood, but the Jeep kept coming and Jeffrey dove sideways and landed in a roll which brought him to his feet. Aimed, fired, pop! A tire burst and the Jeep flipped and its roof hit the dirt hard, the pressure demolishing the windows. Jeffrey held the gun out in front of him and crept slowly toward the flipped Jeep. As he advanced, there sounded a metallic click. Jeffrey stopped, and a moment later an explosion of smoke lifted the Jeep up off the ground. Billows of thick gray clouds spurting out through every orifice, glass spraying like confetti, the Jeep plummeting and clashing with the sand, and fire tore through the engine with its searing hot claws. Jeffrey stood there watching the flames eat the Jeep, with wide and lifeless eyes. Another roar, and another black Jeep materialized, with the driver manning the wheel and a passenger pointing an M16 at Jeffrey. He turned and ran, bullets spraying the sand as he cut through the thick mist and carved a jagged line behind Jeffrey.